Glenn, student here at JTech, and today I'm going to be diagnosing a crank no start. There's really only 4 reasons that you'd have a crank no start. That's going to be either a lack of air, compression, fuel, or ignition. On this car today, alright, so now we're going to verify that there's a crank no start. You can hear it cranking, not starting. We're going to go ahead and shut that off. I hooked up my scanner, started pulling DTCs, which are diagnostic trouble codes. When you scroll through the list here, you can actually see that there is a code for the device ignition, which may be one of our problems. And there's also no CAN bus communication, which potentially could be our problem. No, that one's instrument panel cluster. That one won't be an issue. But we do have that ignition problem there, short to ground or potential open. That would be one form of directional testing, which directional testing is basically getting us toward the problem. So I mentioned that there's either a problem with our air, our ignition, our compression, or a fuel issue. The directional testing would be basically trying to figure out which one of those 4 things was the main cause. So that ignition code could potentially be a directional test, or would be a directional test and potentially a pinpoint test, depending on what that code actually told us if we looked it up in like a bulletin for issues with this particular car. Another thing we can do is we can do an active test. So we go back to the beginning, we'll go to component test. Alright, so now we're going to do a little fuel pump test to see if we're getting fuel. So we go into engine, and we go to functional test, scroll on, nope, actually right there, output control, and that'll allow us to turn on our fuel pump relay. So if we turn on our fuel pump relay, then we should be able to hear our fuel pump turn on. Turn it on or off, I hear no change. So this is actually a directional test that can lead into a pinpoint test, because if our fuel pump isn't turning on when we activate the relay, then we know that there's some sort of issue between the fuel pump and its relay, so we know that that's not actually turning on when we turn the key on, which we're on right now, and we can hear that the fuel pump isn't activated. Another test we could do is while you're cranking, just to make sure there's no ignition issues, you can always perform a little wiggle test on the harness here to make sure all of your injectors all of your injectors / spark plugs are firing the way they're supposed to. Since we suspect that the fuel pump isn't working, another thing you can do is you can actually lift up the air box here, which if it wants to come out, and you can, right in that little port there, you can spray some like ether, some sort of starting fluid to try to jump start the engine. And if you end up spraying in it, or if you spray it in there and the car starts